Hello and welcome to the Wanawake Nyanjani podcast hosted by CRAWN Trust, the show where we elevate women's perspective as we delve into the political, economical, and cultural issues. For our viewers and listeners who haven't heard about CRAWN Trust, CRAWN is an acronym of Community Advocacy and Awareness Trust. CRAWN Trust is a non-profit organization established with the aim of impacting lives and transforming communities by promoting citizens' awareness for their rights and responsibilities and working within towards eliminating gender-based discrimination into the socio-political and culture and economic spheres. Now, CRAWN Trust objective is to contribute to the building of a just and democratic society founded on an informed and empowered citizenry who are drivers of transformative change. Now, CRAWN Trust is currently implementing the Green Champions for Change project, which seeks to ensure meaningful participation of women and marginalized groups in climate change processes, and it is through this project that we are having this amazing and detailed conversation. Now, this episode is sponsored by Akina Mama wa Africa, which we are going to be referring to as AMWA in the discussion. Now, AMWA is a Pan-African organization whose mission is to build feminist leadership and collective power to deconstruct intersectional systems of oppressions to advance women and girls' social justices. In this series, 2-episode series, we seek to listen to stories of women leading climate action towards climate justice. And in the first episode, we are joined by this amazing lady. As you can see, she's very small, but she's not very small in terms of her titles. And in terms of her responsibilities, she is Irene Asua. No, Irene Asua is a social scientist. Where do I start? Irene Asua is a social scientist who has worked as a qualitative researcher, community engagement and outreach person on various social issues. Issues or issues?
Whichever, I don't know.
With a bias of ecological issues. She is the co-convener of Ecological Justice, sits at the National Advisory Committee for the Voices for Justice Climate Action Alliance Advisory Board of Africa Youth Initiative on Climate Change, Climate Justice Core Group at IBON Africa, Technical Working Group at the Illegal Resources Foundation, Climate Justice Consortium, and supports outreach at Ukombozi Library. Now, Irene, karibu sana to this episode.
Asante.
And before we even delve into the questions, these are so many titles. In a nutshell, who are you?
A social scientist, a community organizer, a qualitative researcher.
And a co-convener.
Yes.
So what exactly and who is exactly a co-convener? What does she do?
Yeah. So I co-convene Ecological Justice, which is a collective of diverse community groups reclaiming, rehabilitating, and transforming what should be public spaces. At the moment, we are just in urban spaces, mainly in Nairobi and some parts of Kisumu. So according to our constitution, there are places that are considered public spaces, but for some reason or the other, these places are not public because they are either grabbed or they have become illegal dump sites, or they've just been transformed into some other things, apartments or whatever. So the reason we do this is because as time goes, our urban spaces are becoming more and more inhumane, more and more unjust, and more not social. And the projection is in 10, 20 years to come, 70% of the population is going to be in the urban areas. At the moment, 60 to 70% of people living in the urban spaces live in slum or slum-like places. So this means you have a huge demographic living in indecent housing, in fact, non-existent housing, if I can call that, because they don't have the necessities and amenities that make it a social housing that fits human dignity. And so these spaces is an attempt to have people have access to green spaces, to have children have spaces to play, to have people have recreational spaces, because adults also need to express themselves and play. And also to have people have spaces where they can farm. So there are kitchen gardens in some of those green spaces. Again, Kenya was recently named one of the hungriest countries. So food is really at the core of human survival as well. So that's one of the reasons why we reclaim, rehabilitate, and transform these spaces.
That is very interesting how Kenya has been named as the hungriest country, yet our leaders are very generous in terms of extending help and the resources that as a country we have or we are straining to have, right? Mm-hmm. Now, why do you continue to advocate for justice?
Because human beings deserve to live with dignity, really. Mm-hmm. It's that simple. And we can't live in dignity if we don't take care of the planet that we live in. And also, humans are part of nature. So as humans live in dignity and humans are heavily dependent on nature, it is important that we take care of nature so that dependency is beneficial to the future generations and to the planet and to us as well.
Okay. Talk to us, because you are a member of the working group of Nairobi Justice Working Group. What is the work group about? What is the working group about? What are you guys trying to achieve?
The Nairobi Water Justice Working Group is a working group consisting of various organizations. The reason why the working group came together was because of the proposed Nairobi Water Services and Sewerage Services Bill. I am not sure of the sequence. And there were some elements of that bill that are problematic. And so the Nairobi Water Justice Working Group came together to try and have an intervention as the bill is being tabled at the Nairobi County Assembly. But also beyond just the bill, Nairobi has had a water crisis for the longest time.
True.
And so beyond that bill, what the working group seeks to do is to continue to mobilize and have community conversations so that people are able to push government to have water remain a public good, as it is in the Constitution and in some international instruments that Kenya has signed and ratified. So that's the goal, to have water remain a public good. And if there are interventions to be made, it shouldn't be geared towards privatization, because our water is technically privatized already.
What do you mean, water is privatized? I mean...
Yeah, it is privatized. In Nairobi, car wash and construction places have more water than human beings in Nairobi have water. And your tariff is not the same water tariff that somebody else pays. Mm-hmm. There are hoods in Nairobi that have the water ATMs and the meters running, but there is no water, but the bills still come.
My question is, when you talk about privatization of water, maybe somebody is thinking water is not going to become a personal, like the way that you have your own apartment or the way like you have your own land. Now water is going to become yours. Like recently, a first lady adopted the forest. So when you talk about privatization of water, what exactly is that?
When I talk about privatization of water, I mean water is going to be solely a property of a company. Okay. So like an example is when Kenya signed the WTO agreement to have water listed as a mineral. Now what that like literally means is that Cindy and Daughters Company Limited can say, we are mining water. And then we are able to sell it, to put it in Nairobi Stock Exchange or whatever, and we determine the price, because now it's a private entity.
How did we reach here as a country?
Okay, good question, which I don't have an answer to. But for me, I think I don't see Kenya as a country. I see it as a company, really, because of what we do sometimes. Because of what Kenya does sometimes. But anyway, so when you leave water in the hands of corporations and private firms, what that means is that they can do whatever they want and they can decide who gets the water and who does not. Now, imagine at the moment when the Constitution still provides for water as a public good, and Article 43 says every Kenyan has a right to clean and safe water in adequate quantities. There is a quantity, according to the UN instruments that Kenya has signed, the amount of water that every person needs to have per day for survival. If you look at Nairobi, not so many people have access to that much water.
True.
Like I said, there are places where people don't have water. There are places where there has been rationing. So even when Nairobi Water says there will be rationing, people are just like, but there's been rationing.
What
like,
do you
so
mean?
what
This
do
is
you
something
mean?
new.
Exactly. So, and then you can imagine now the ripple effect when you privatize such a necessity.
Is this happening only in Nairobi or in other counties as well?
So at the moment, we only know about Nairobi. And that is why we are saying beyond Nairobi, we also need to be on the lookout for other counties as well. And we also need to think about, now that the climate change amendment bill is talking about carbon markets and stuff, and the impact of these things that we are signing into law, what will they have on our water resources?
Okay.
And how are we taking care of our water? Before we think about the taps, we need to think about where the water is coming from. What is the state of those resources? Why is Nairobi, a technically wetland place, having a water problem? Why does Nairobi have to get water from Murang'a and Kiambu and wherever?
Because every time that we hear about scarcity of water in the country, okay, most times they think the country that is going to come to mind is Samburu, Turkana, or Wajir, or some place, but not exactly in Nairobi. But as you have said, people in Nairobi are actually not getting water from Kiambu, Murang'a, and Kaini, of which I don't know the amount of water kama El Nino imefika huko at the moment. So what is the impact of water and climate crisis?
So yeah, tied to what I was saying, before we think about the taps, we need to think about our water resources. And we need to think about the other ecosystems that ensure that this water is there. So we need to think about our forest cover, our tree cover. Even when we're talking about the hunger issue, one of the things that is at the core of food production is water. You can't produce food without water.
True.
So, and we have a country that, I don't know, every 2 years we have a drought or a famine that that we say is coming. And a country that is also saying, I'm sure you've seen your president walking around talking about the climate crisis and how it's going to impact Africa. And then at the same time talks about how Kenya wants to lead the rest of Africa. Like there's just a lot of contradictions.
Yes.
So you have this country that doubled poverty in the last 10 years, that is one of the hungriest countries according to the global index, that announces drought and famine every 2 years. But also this country wants to lead the rest of Africa to resolve this crisis.
I mean, it's just 3 months ago.
Yeah. So the crisis of water, food, the climate, they are so intertwined, because when we are talking about the climate crisis, we are talking about access to these natural resources, which then feed into these necessities like food, water, housing, that we're saying that humans need to have a dignified life.
And as you explained that, what is running through my mind is women and marginalized groups. Talk about persons with disabilities, talk about girls, talk about what is the impact? Where do they stand?
They say the crisis is a polycrisis. I don't know what adjective we would use when
how does it affect
when
the
it
women?
comes to the women, because you've said double burden, triple burden, but it seems like the burden is far much than that. From your experience, I'm assuming, but from my experience, the burden of domestic and reproductive care is always on the women.
True.
We wake up, we find water there for cooking, water for bathing, water for whatever.
Before you even wake up, you're thinking in your sleep, is there water in this house?
Exactly. You don't bother, how did that water get there?
True.
Who labored to get it? So the fact that that burden is on women means that when there is a water crisis, the burden is like times, because you have to ensure that your domestic duties in the house are there, but you also have to ensure that this thing is this resource to ensure that these domestic things happen is also available. And then you also look at the economic position that women are in. I mean, there's all this hullabaloo about, now women have go to school, women have access to job opportunities, etc., etc., etc. But how many women do you know who have no access to school, no access to job opportunities? I know so many.
A whole list.
And every time I walk in this country, I'm just like, why is this still happening in this century? So you have all these socioeconomic barriers against you, and then you have this burden, and then you have this crisis that is worsening this burden. So that's why I'm saying I really can't find an adjective that explains everything that is happening in there.
It's like, sometimes I like comparing a woman to a cemetery. You know what a cemetery is? Cemetery Mads. That Mads book. In high school that has all solutions inside. So it's like a woman has to find a solution to everything. Where is water going to come from? Apart from water, do we have food? Is that food going to be sustainable to my children, to my family, to my husband? Because husbands are also called children. I mean, true. So before we talk about climate justice in details, how is gender justice paired with climate justice?
Because of the burden we have talked about. So we cannot say we are going to resolve this crisis if we do not resolve the economic well-being of women. So it's, I don't know, it's going to be not a solution if we don't resolve it. And then we cannot resolve it if we don't ensure that while we are working for working public systems, women also have equal and equitable access to those systems. So when we are talking about just transition, for example, we need to think about the space of the thousands of households, 70% or 80%, I don't know, of households that are dependent on firewood and charcoal, for instance. In this transition, where is the space of those women who have the burden of, getting the charcoal and the firewood? If we are talking about reforming the water infrastructure, how are we thinking about the fact that the domestic labor is purely on women? If we are talking about making cities more human, how sensitive is our infrastructure to people with disabilities? And if we are talking about doing reforms in the education system, how are we going to ensure that girls, women, people with disabilities are included in that designing of that reform of the education system? And how is it sensitive to some of their needs that are already blurred with all this data and all these policies? There are a lot of realities that they are still blind to, or they just literally intentionally blur them. So how do we resolve those things?
Let me just take you back a little bit. And earlier on you mentioned that it is very interesting, let me use the word interesting, that a country that announces famine and drought and sometimes asks for appeal, Saidia wa Kenya, like every 2 to 3 years, also experiences El Nino, like what we are about to experience. And we have areas that every year they have to experience flooding. Talk about Budalangi. Talk about areas, do we call them highland areas? Why is it that, I'm just thinking loud, correct me if I'm wrong, why is it that we do not come up with ways and resources to make sure that that water is tapped or something?
The resources are there. I mean, Kenya is one of the countries that has an authority a strategic plan, a policy, an act, a state department, a ministry, all those things for everything. So even when you look at water, for instance, so you have the Ministry of Water, you have WASREB, which is supposed to regulate the tariffs that you pay. I don't know if they do that. There is the regional waterworks bodies that are supposed to ensure that the water infrastructure is there, and then they give it to the companies who now, the county water companies who now distribute the water through the county water corporations. So that infrastructure is there. That is why I'm asking, why do we need another policy when we have not interrogated why this infrastructure that is there is not working?
Why it's
in
not
the
working.
first place? Yeah, exactly. So these things are there. The problem is there's just no goodwill. Like, people just don't care.
Okay. And maybe somebody's asking, what is this policy that you're talking about? What is the climate policy?
Gosh, we have so many of them. I'm not sure I can count all of them.
Okay, give us
Like I said, we have
three.
so many of them. So there is the
Just give us
Climate
three.
Change Amendment Bill. There is the National Climate Change Adaptation Plan. There is the National Climate Change Response Strategy. Then the counties have their own, climate adaptation plans and their own climate change policies. So if you go to kenyalaw.org, you'll see we are not short of policies and laws. There are so many. You lose count of them.
So out of all these
I
policies,
also
do we have any that is working?
I don't know of any that is working.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, so like now we want a new bill for water,
Yeah.
but the existing ones, I am not sure where we have reached with their implementation. Because like you said, it's not just Nairobi. Where I come from, it is just recent that Kisumu started having piped water, and not every place in Kisumu has piped water.
I was very shocked when I went home. All along since I was a little girl, I knew that we do not pay for water. I knew that we don't pay for water because we have a river just nearby. Yeah. And so people are able to tap water through self-help groups, and they are able to access water. And the last time that I went home, I found a very huge bill of water, and I was asking my parents, what is this? What do you mean that we pay for water when we actually have a river down here? Yeah. So, in your opinion, and in the role that you play, what do you think the people in power should do in terms of implementing these policies to make sure that they're working, having in mind women and marginalized groups?
You just have to ensure that people are at the center of whatever it is you're planning and designing and implementing, that people are meaningfully and actively engaged right from the start. Because what we have is that things just happen, and then we hear about them when they're almost quote unquote over because they didn't happen.
True.
And then you hear, okay, so we have had this policy, it's 5 years, we are reviewing. You have never heard of that policy.
What do you mean policy?
Or you have this dam that has been is being constructed
Mm-hmm.
since forever. Yeah, like there's a dam, I think in Nyando, that is always being proposed. I don't know when it is going to start being implemented, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we always have this, I usually say Kenya is a country that is ever under construction. You always have this project starting, being flagged off, being reviewed, but you really don't see
We've never seen a complete
the
project.
ripple effect. So for me, really, the priority now is not making any laws. The priority now should be amending and repealing laws that are retrogressive and ensuring that people are meaningfully engaged in implementing the progressive elements that we already have in our legal and policy framework.
Okay.
And like shut down some of the institutions. We really don't need an institution for everything.
Trust you me, in the country that we are in, there will be opening of new institutions day in, day out.
Yeah, because
New
then you have
bills.
this institution duplicating what this one is doing, and then this one is conflicting with that other one. And then you have this intergovernmental working groups, committees, CG panels, and then they're also not doing any of the coordination. You see,
It's kind of ambitious, or what happens?
No, we just have too many unnecessary agencies and policies. Yeah. We need to operationalize what would work and just reduce. And some of them just need to be scrapped off because I don't know what they're doing.
Okay. And perhaps an ordinary citizen there, especially a woman or a person with disability, because I think those are the two major marginalized groups that we have in the country. Maybe they're asking, how can we be part of the climate action and in part of the decision-making processes?
We always have to be on the lookout for the public participation cycles. I know we are not doing good on that front as a country, but as citizens, we really now have to, like, by force, by fire, ensure that we use those spaces and support each other to ensure that those processes are more meaningful. And also we have to be always on the lookout for information because, like I said, in this country, things just pop up. Like, it's difficult to keep up.
True.
We need to do that. And also communities also have to, you see how communities just usually mobilize and organize themselves for initiatives like within the communities. We also need to start doing that now politically. The way we come through with the chamas, the self-help groups and stuff, we need that kind of mobilization. And I usually tell women whenever I am on the ground, that energy they have during the campaign season,
Direct them.
of campaigning for people and going to door to door, direct that energy now to these political processes. And the member of county assembly, people really need to get hold of those people. They have no business running around, really. They just have 3 roles: legislation, being a linkage between the people and the county assembly, and attending the county executive meetings if they are needed. Yeah, so they really have no business being all over the space. They should be at the ward. And I don't understand why they have managers. The MCA and the ward admin are enough. They should be at the ward.
What were grow?
Yeah, to coordinate the people and check what the people need to the county assembly. Yeah, exactly. People really need to get hold of the member of the county assembly.
Okay. Now, talking about policies, we had ACS being held last month or this month? Africa Climate Summit. It was held in Nairobi, and we had a lot of promises, discussions. Oh, I don't know we're going to do what. I don't know we promise in the next 5 years, we promise in the next... And all those promises that were made. Now, we have COP28 that is coming up. In your capacity as an advocate for justice, what is your message to world leaders, especially in terms of gender and climate issues?
I honestly have zero faith in COP processes. Because since I started following COP processes, every time there is a pronouncement, adaptation and mitigation fund, loss and damage fund, we are going to cut down on emissions, we are going to phase out coal, oil and gas. Then the next COP, no, we are not going to phase out, we are going to phase down. Then the next COP, now they're saying it's too ambitious to do the transition. Remember, they're the ones who's committed to transition.
True.
So that back and forth, I really have like little faith in it. And to the best of my knowledge, I just know that these people are not going to resolve the climate crisis. That's why I'm saying at the community level, people really have to mobilize. We really have to mobilize and organize ourselves so that we have working systems. As they are, we keep giving messages. People will go to COP, they talk, then they come back. And then the situation goes. The African Climate Summit, I think it was an American Climate Summit. Yeah. Even from the program and how everything else was going, it's like America had more space than any other African in the room.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think it was an African Climate Summit.
Yeah. Come to think of it. Come to think of it. And I don't know if there's anything interesting that you picked from that discussion.
There was too much centering of private sector.
Mm-hmm.
So companies and private consultancy firms were just like, it was so open, it was not even hidden. Like, that was their playing field.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, you guys, you are participants. We are the ones who run the show.
So listen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And let's talk about climate finance.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us about it?
We cannot resolve the climate crisis through debt.
Uh-huh.
And all these loss and damage fund, adaptation and mitigation fund, I don't know, GCF processes, net fund, all those things, that architecture has to change.
Mm-hmm.
So that these people we are talking about, women, girls, marginalized groups, people with disability, have access to these funds. As it is very difficult to access them, and a huge percentage of them are loans.
Yeah.
And if I am trying to resolve a crisis, I'm literally trying to survive.
Sure.
My resolving climate crisis cannot be a bankable case. You know, they're telling communities, bring bankable projects.
Yeah.
Put an investment case.
Mm-hmm.
If people are literally, we're literally trying to survive, people are dying.
Day in, day out.
That cannot be an investment case.
Mm-hmm.
We are trying to resolve something that is threatening our survival. So it can't be a bankable case.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to have public funded climate finance that is accessible to the people.
Okay. So what's your call to maybe IMF and World Bank in
We
terms
cannot
of
resolve the climate
nothing.
crisis through
Oh,
debt.
okay.
You cannot loan us to solve the climate crisis. It's like, seriously, make it make sense. Does it make any economic sense if you're in a crisis and then I give you debt?
And is it even accessible to women and marginalized groups to start with?
Mm-hmm.
Well, parting shot, Irene.
The system and the architecture as it is not going to resolve the climate crisis.
Mm-hmm.
As people, we have to mobilize and organize and work towards alternative systems. And those systems have to be public systems, working public systems. I have not seen any public-private partnerships that has worked without throwing economically deprived people under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are to take all of us out of this crisis, in bold, if you're going to put subtitles, working public systems.
Mm-hmm.
No space for centering private corporations.
Okay.
It has not worked.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it will work when I'm dead, because I'm sure in my lifetime it won't work. It has never worked. We must have working public systems.
Okay. And as we wind up this conversation, where can people, do we have like a platform where people can follow this conversation, can learn more about climate justice, gender justice? Do you have a platform? Do you know of a platform or where people can actually follow you?
Yeah. I am Irene Asua on every platform, Twitter, Instagram. I'm not very active on Instagram.
It's not Twitter, it's
Twitter,
X.
X. Facebook.
Uh-huh.
There are also a number of podcasts that I have been in. So if you just type my name, you'll see it. You can also follow Ecological Justice online on Twitter and on Facebook.
Okay. Thank you very much, Irene.
You're welcome.
People, we must have functioning public systems.
Perfecto.
That is our parting shot. I do not want to add anything, but we will, of course, continue with this conversation on our social media platforms. That is CRAWN Trust Kenya on Facebook, on X, formerly Twitter. It's very weird. And of course, on our website, that is www.crowntrust.org. So be sure to join us and to follow the conversation. But in the next conversation or in the next episode, we will be joined with a very beautiful woman from Wajir County, and we'll be getting to understand more about water, more about climate. Of course, remember this project, the Green Champions for Climate Change project, is all about knowing what is the balance between gender and climate, especially when it comes to women and marginalized groups. But for now, I have been your host, Wanjiro Kenya, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of our podcast, Wanawake, Nyanjani. Until then, bye.